I thought I was just taking a ride to work, but I was actually being framed by an organized scheme for a serious accusation. Now I'm being hunted by the Internal Security Service, and the person leading the charge is someone I buried 5 years ago. The morning had started out as predictably as a metronome. Coffee, lukewarm and bitter, held in a paper cup that was already starting to sog at the seams. My briefcase was heavy with the weight of documents I'd spent all night preparing for the merger meeting of my career. I was a junior analyst at a firm that didn't even know my middle name, let alone the fact that I was running on 4 hours of sleep and sheer adrenaline. I checked my app. The ride was 3 minutes away. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, its paint gleaming under the harsh morning sun, and for a split second, I felt a strange prickle at the back of my neck. Intuition is a funny thing. It's usually quiet until it's too late. I climbed into the back seat, mumbled a quick "good morning," and buried my face in my phone, checking emails that didn't really matter. The driver was a man in his late 50s, I'd guess, with salt and pepper hair, and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't say a word. He didn't even acknowledge my greeting. He just pulled away from the curb with a smooth, calculated precision that felt more like a professional pilot than a guy trying to make a few extra bucks on a Tuesday. We were halfway to the financial district, navigating the dense labyrinth of the city's morning rush, when the atmosphere in the car shifted. It wasn't a sudden noise or a flash of light. It was the driver's eyes. I caught them in the rearview mirror. They weren't looking at the road anymore. They were darting between the side mirrors with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I looked out the back window. A gray SUV with tinted windows was weaving through traffic behind us, keeping a consistent 3-car distance. Every time we changed lanes, they changed lanes. Every time we slowed for a light, they slowed. My heart began to drum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was about to ask him if everything was okay when the driver's hand suddenly dropped from the steering wheel to his side, and the car's engine let out a low, guttural roar as he dropped it into a lower gear. His voice sliced through the silence like a jagged blade. "Get down! Under the seat, now!" I froze. "What, excuse me?" "I said get down," he roared, his voice no longer calm but filled with a terrifying urgency. "Now, if you want to keep breathing—" I didn't have time to process it. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, he slammed his foot on the accelerator. The force threw me back into the leather, and the world outside the windows became a blurred streak of gray and glass. We swerved, narrowly missing a delivery truck, the tires screaming against the asphalt. Through the rear window, I saw the gray SUV lurch forward, its engine whining as it gave chase. They weren't just following us anymore. They were hunting us. "Who are they?" I screamed, tucking my head between my knees, my hands trembling as I gripped the carpeted floor of the car. "People who want what you're carrying," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "I just have legal documents," I cried out, my voice cracking. "It's just a merger." "They don't care about your merger, kid. They care about the Internal Security Service investigation hidden in those files that you weren't supposed to see." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the cabin, the sound of something heavy impacting the rear glass. I saw spiderweb cracks bloom across the window. These weren't just random thugs. This was an organized scheme, a coordinated strike. My driver reached into the glove box, not for a registration or a map, but for a heavy, metallic object. An illegal weapon he handled with the ease of someone who had seen far too much combat. "Stay down and don't move," he yelled as he yanked the steering wheel to the left, sending us careening into a narrow, dark alleyway. The car scraped against the brick walls, sparks flying like fireworks in the shadows. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from a dumpster. He turned to me, his face pale, blood trickling from a small cut on his forehead. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small sealed bag containing a white, prohibited substance and shoved it into my hand. "They're going to try to pin a serious accusation on you," he whispered, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. "They'll say you're part of a ring of radicals. If they catch us, they'll make sure you spend decades behind bars. You need to run." Before I could ask him what he meant, the mouth of the alley was blocked by the gray SUV. 3 men in tactical gear stepped out, holding illegal weapons leveled directly at our windshield. The driver looked at me one last time, a grim smile on his face. "On the count of 3, open the door and jump into the basement window to your right. Don't look back. 1, 2. The first shot shattered the windshield glass, raining down on us like diamonds, and as I braced myself to leap, the driver didn't move toward the door. Instead, he lunged across the center console toward me, but he wasn't trying to help me out. He was reaching for my briefcase, his face twisted into something I didn't recognize. "Change of plans," he hissed, the barrel of his own weapon pressing hard against my ribs. "Give me the files or you don't even make it to the alley." I couldn't breathe. The air in the car had turned into lead, heavy and suffocating. I stared into his eyes, cold, calculating, and devoid of the protector persona he'd worn just seconds ago. The man I thought was my only hope was now the very person holding a death warrant against my ribs. Outside, the men in tactical gear were closing in, their heavy boots crunching on the broken glass and gravel of the alleyway. The organized scheme he had mentioned wasn't just some vague threat. It was a net, and I was the prize catch. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my hands tightening around the handle of my briefcase. "You said they were radicals. You said they were trying to break my life with a serious accusation." "They are," he hissed, his eyes darting to the side mirror as the first of the men reached the rear of the sedan. "But I'm the one who's going to make sure that accusation sticks. Those files contain the names of every double agent within the Internal Security Service. If those names get out, the whole system collapses. If I hand them over, I get a clean slate and a suitcase full of untraceable cash. If you keep them, you get an enormous rock in a cell where the sun doesn't shine." He nudged the muzzle of the weapon deeper into my side, the pain sharp and cold. "The prohibited substances I gave you? That was the backup plan. If I can't get the files, I leave you here with the bag and a story about you being a courier for a group of radicals. Either way, kid, your old life ended the moment you stepped into this car." The window next to the driver suddenly shattered as one of the men outside smashed it with the butt of his weapon. Miller, if that was even his name, didn't flinch. He fired a single shot toward the ceiling of the car, the roar of the blast deafening in the cramped space. The men outside scrambled for cover, and in that split second of chaos, the power dynamic shifted. The driver's attention flickered toward the broken window, his grip on the weapon loosening just a fraction of an inch. It was a gamble, a desperate suicidal leap of faith. I didn't think. I just acted. I slammed my briefcase into his face with every ounce of strength I had left. The corner of the heavy leather bag caught him square in the temple. His head barked against the doorframe, and his weapon discharged into the floorboards, the bullet tearing through the carpeted metal. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. I threw myself against the rear door, which had been weakened by the initial impact of the chase. It swung open with a groan of protesting metal. I tumbled out onto the wet, oily pavement of the alley, my knees skinning painfully against the ground. Screams and shouted orders filled the air. "He's out! Sector 4, moving north!" A voice boomed, deep, distorted by a comms mask. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the briefcase to my chest as if it were a shield. I ran. I didn't look for the basement window the driver had mentioned. I knew now that was likely a trap, a dead end where I could be easily cornered. Instead, I sprinted toward a stack of wooden pallets leaning against a rusted fire escape. My lungs burned, and the metallic taste of fear was thick in my mouth. Behind me, the alley erupted into a chorus of gunfire and shouting. I didn't know if they were shooting at me or at the driver who had betrayed both sides, but I didn't stay to find out. I hauled myself up the fire escape, my fingers catching on the cold, jagged iron. I climbed until my vision blurred, reaching the third-floor landing just as a black van screeched to a halt at the far end of the alley, cutting off my only ground-level exit. I ducked behind a heavy industrial AC unit, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I needed to know what was in this briefcase. I needed to know why people were willing to kill for a junior analyst's merger notes. With trembling fingers, I fumbled with the combination lock. My birthday, a sequence that felt like a relic from a different lifetime. The latches clicked open. I pulled the lid back, expecting to see the thick stacks of legal contracts and financial spreadsheets I'd printed yesterday. But the top layer of paper was gone. In its place was a high-resolution photograph of me taken from a distance, standing in my kitchen 2 days ago. Underneath the photo sat a small encrypted drive and a single manila folder labeled Project Clean Sweep. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the first page. It wasn't an internal security service investigation into radicals. It was a list of high-ranking officials marked for permanent removal to cover up a massive corruption network. And at the very bottom of the list, highlighted in red, was a name that made the world tilt on its axis. It was the name of the man who had hired me 3 years ago, my mentor, the only person I trusted. Suddenly, a shadow fell over me. I looked up, the briefcase still open in my lap. Standing on the roof ledge above the fire escape was a figure dressed in the same tactical gear as the men below. But as they pulled off their mask, I didn't see a stranger. I saw my mother, who I had buried 5 years ago. She looked down at me, her expression devoid of any maternal warmth, and pointed her weapon at the briefcase. "Drop the bag, son," she said, her voice as cold as the steel in her hand. "You were never supposed to be the analyst. You were always supposed to be the fall guy." I stared at her, the woman I had mourned for 5 long years. The grief that had hollowed me out, the nights I'd spent wondering what I could have done differently. It all felt like a cruel, twisted joke. Her face was harder than I remembered, the lines around her eyes etched not by age, but by a lifetime of secrets. She didn't look like a mother. She looked like a soldier of the very organized scheme that was currently trying to erase me. 5 years, I whispered, my voice trembling. "I buried a casket with your name on it." "You buried a narrative, Elias," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The service needed me to vanish. My death was the only way to infiltrate the radicals and the corruption within the internal security service. I did it for the country. I did it to keep you safe." "Safe?" I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You put me in that car. You let them frame me with prohibited substances. You set me up for a serious accusation that would have seen me rot for an enormous srock in a cage. It was the only way to flush out the traitors," she countered, stepping closer. The illegal weapon in her hand never wavered. "The files in that bag are the key. If you hand them over to me now, I can fix this. I can clear your name and bring you inside. We can be a family again, under a new identity." I looked down at the briefcase. The list of names, the encrypted drive. It wasn't just data. It was the lifeblood of a shadow empire. If I gave it to her, I wasn't being saved. I was being recruited into the same darkness that had consumed her. I looked back at her and realized the mother I loved was truly dead. This was just a ghost wearing her skin. "You're lying," I said, my voice suddenly steady. "If you wanted me safe, you wouldn't have used me as bait. You needed a clean civilian to carry the data because you knew the Internal Security Service was watching every professional operative. I was the only one who could get past the perimeter without triggering an alarm." Movement flashed in my peripheral vision. The driver, Miller, had recovered. He dragged himself onto the roof landing, his face a mask of blood and rage. He saw my mother and froze, his own weapon raised. "You double-crossing witch!" he spat. "The group told me you were out. They told me I was the one bringing the files in." "The group tells everyone what they want to hear, Miller," my mother said, not even turning her head. "You were a contingency, a loud, violent contingency." In that moment of three-way tension, I realized I was the only one who actually knew what was on the drive. I'd seen the bottom of the list. My name wasn't just a fall guy tag. I was the beneficiary. My father, before he died, had set up a dead man switch. The Project Clean Sweep wasn't just a list of targets. It was a map to the stolen assets of the entire organized scheme. I didn't give them a choice. I grabbed the encrypted drive and held it over the edge of the fire escape, suspended over the dark, narrow abyss of the alley. "If either of you fires, this drive hits the pavement," I shouted, and I've already set the uplink on my phone. One tap and every name on this list goes live to the public servers of every major news outlet in the country. The Internal Security Service won't be able to bury this. Your clean sweep will be a public execution. My mother's eyes widened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the woman I knew. Fear. Not for her life, but for the collapse of the world she'd built on lies. "Elias, don't," she pleaded. "It's already done," I said. I dropped the drive. As it fell, I didn't wait for it to hit the ground. I dove for the rooftop door, kicking it open and sprinting into the stairwell. Behind me, the alley erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed, but I didn't look back. I reached the street level, blended into the growing morning crowd, and disappeared into the subway. 2 months later, I sat in a small cafe in a city whose language I was still learning. The news on the overhead TV showed the fallout. Dozens of high-ranking officials arrested, an organized scheme dismantled from the inside out. My mother's face wasn't among the mugshots. She was a ghost again, lost to the shadows. I had no home, no career, and no family left. But as I took a sip of my coffee, I looked at the briefcase sitting at my feet, now filled only with my original merger notes. I was no longer a fall guy. I was the only one who knew the truth, and for the first time in my life, I was finally free.